You are on the 14th Step, a podcast about addiction and recovery. We are sponsored by the Golden Crescent Regional Recovery Initiative and affiliated with the Billy T. Cattan Recovery Outreach Center right here in Victoria, Texas. You can learn about both organizations in the description below the video. My name is Mark. I'm a professional counselor and...
My name is Skip, and I'm a recovery coach or a peer recovery specialist.
Wow.
Yes. So what are we going to talk about today?
I was going to ask you the same question.
You know, I think as we meet with people and have meetings during the week, different topics come up.
Yeah.
And I think talking about some of those would be a good idea. So I've got a few topics we can chat about today.
Let's just riff off of it.
That come off. Let's talk about...
I'm completely unprepared.
It's okay. Let's talk about trauma. Let's jump in with both feet.
It's a nice, easy one to start
A nice,
off with.
easy one to start with.
So what is trauma?
Oh, well, let me ask you this. How many, I'm going to flip the question back on you. How many, in cases when you talk to recovering addicts, does trauma play a part in their addiction?
All of them. I think all of them. And I personally have the theory, and it's not my theory, but that it's the theory that I work with, that addiction is a condition caused by trauma. Mm-hmm. I don't think that addiction is necessarily about drugs and alcohol, which is frustrating when all of our diagnostic stuff is all about drug and alcohol use. I think addiction, the condition itself, is predates any kind of drug or alcohol use.
Absolutely.
And I think that the drug and alcohol is a symptom of that unresolved trauma, and it becomes the medicine for it. It's the solution for it.
It is.
So I think that trauma that happens, some kind of wound that happens at an earlier age, most likely in developmentally childhood kind of thing or adolescence, that kind of carries with someone until they discover a drug or a drink in the normal course of, teenage experimentation or whatever. Mm-hmm. And for those people that already have that wound, the effect of that drug is so profound that it fixes that problem. It
does. And it does.
Yeah,
especially
very well.
Especially at the beginning.
It's remarkably effective.
Mm-hmm. And, I think of in those exact situations, and you're talking about childhood trauma,
yeah,
or, where somebody would be more of a victim. But it can also be, how many times have you come across somebody that's had an injury trauma or some trauma as an adult and finds that getting on some sort of a drug helps to take away that trauma as well, like PTSD from a situation, or you have surgery and then you start taking medication. I mean, I'm sure that happens all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I
think injuries, which is literally like trauma, it's the definition
physical
of
trauma.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But injuries can also be emotionally traumatic, because if your quality of life is lowered because of surgery, or you can't do the things that you want to do, that will affect self-esteem. And then an opiate medication, which is usually prescribed, and especially 20 years ago, you could stub your toe and get 90-hydrocodone for it.
I was told I've had both my hips replaced.
Yeah.
And I was told as a younger man that I was at that time, that's a pretty rare surgery to have something like that, and there'd be significant downtime. And I was told that it was going to affect me psychologically a lot, because you're going to feel very helpless.
Yeah.
And that's very tough for a man in his 30s. And it happened.
For sure.
It really happened. I couldn't do anything for myself for several weeks, So you're very dependent on people, and somebody that's not used to that, man, that can affect you weird.
For sure.
Yeah.
And the medication prescribed, the way that opiates work, is more than just numbing pain. And they're not even that great at numbing pain.
No, not at all.
It changes your perception of pain because you're no longer despairing over it. You don't feel so bad about it.
I think it does that much more than it does alleviate the pain.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so the side effect of that is whatever emotional pain that you might be experiencing because you're frustrated or you feel isolated. I mean, it has to feel isolating to have hip surgeries when you said you were in your 20s?
In my 30s.
In your 30s. When you're young and you want to do things, and all of a sudden you can't do the things that you used to be able to. There has to be some emotional stuff that goes with that.
I put it off for a long time because my big thing was, look, I know it's bad right now, but I know what I have and what I can deal with. And what scared me about it was the unknown of as soon as they're going to take something natural out of me and put something mechanical and metal in me. I have absolutely no prediction of what that's going to do for me in the future. So it scared me a little bit.
It's scary to be on an operating table. I've been on an operating table before, and it's cold. You have 10 people looking over you with blades and saws, and it's kind of freaky.
It's very freaky. Anyway, going back in trauma and people that are victims of childhood trauma, I don't know how that's fixable.
I don't know how it's fixable either. It's really hard to even describe it. I've been working in the addiction treatment field for about 10 years, roughly. And just defining what addiction is really difficult. It's a complicated problem. And by the time you get someone who's been using for 10 years, 20 years, and I can think about myself too, I used for about that long. And you ask someone, well, why do you use? They don't know. Nobody even knows. You use because you found it when you were younger. Someone gave it to you and you took it. And for a reason that is really beyond your conscious mind, it was relieving of something. It relieved something that you didn't even know could be relieved, but it felt right. And I've been thinking about this a lot, and I actually gave a lecture on the nature of childhood trauma and how that affects someone in a really profound way. And it made a lot of sense to me because I think that when we're talking about an addiction is a relationship. An addiction is a relationship that someone enters into that feels very safe and it's comforting. It's more than just a habit or just something to do that's fun. It
gets into your personal psyche.
It does, and it's
relational.
It becomes the primary relationship in a person's life.
It does.
Because we will prioritize that relationship over any other relationship that we have, including our spouse, our children, whoever else. And really, it becomes so dominant that the relationship that someone will have with their drug becomes the means to have relationships with other people.
Right.
And that was something that I've had to latch onto because it's very frustrating, especially working with parents who are choosing drugs over their kids. Well, why would they do that? Why would someone do that?
That's right.
And in talking to them, you know that they love their kids because they'll say it and you believe them. I mean, there's no reason to think that they don't love their kids.
Right.
But the relationship that they have with their drug is kind of the avenue that they can feel okay to even interact with anyone else.
And you know what, if I can say this the right way, that relationship they have with the drugs, depending on their lifestyle, their situation, their personal relationships, that will dictate every chain reaction down the line that is going to spiral that into serious trouble. and where they may end up 5 or 10 years down the road. If somebody never had any issues getting any of their medication or their drugs, and it was just at the whim, that would be one thing. But then you have issues where you can't get it anymore. Doctors quit prescribing it. People go to ridiculous means to get it, and that's a chain reaction that has you spiraling downhill. And when they finally come to treatment, it's just a ball of tangled twine.
Yep.
And it's like you said, it's so far down this road you can't even almost explain how you got there in the first place.
No idea.
And we've talked about this before, and it breaks my heart when someone who's had childhood trauma and has been a victim, a true victim in every sense of the word, that none of it was their fault.
Right.
But as they get older, they react to it and find a drug that helps numb them of those bad thoughts.
Right.
And they go down this road to where they are completely addicted, and they finally come for help, and then someone tells them they have to take personal responsibility over what's happened in their life, and they just throw their hands up in the air and say, "What are you talking about? None of this was my fault."
Right.
I can't begin to imagine where that